This is your host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions, and today I'm actually flying solo because I'm tackling a toy line that very rarely my friends have even played with, because this is a particular toy line that came out in the mid 1980s, and many of my friends who were born around 85 to 87 were literally infants when this came out. And what I'm talking about is the action figure line for the 80s hit The Karate Kid, starring Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita. So let's go back to 1984 when the original Karate Kid came out. This was a basically Rocky for the 1980s, but with karate instead of boxing. And ironically enough, both films being directed by John Avildsen, who had won an Oscar for Rocky, but after that had went through kind of a slump in his career until he came across a screenplay by Robert Mark Kamen, who now writes for the Taken and Transporter movies, basically anything for Luc Besson. And this was like a little small picture, the typical underdog story of the kid from out of town who falls in love with a new girl, ruffles feathers with the girl's ex boyfriend, who happens to be a big time martial artist and a black belt. And in the midst of trying to defend his honor, he finds an unlikely mentor through the handyman in his new apartment, and that happens to be Mr. Miyagi. And Miyagi, as a result of trying to settle the beef with the villain Johnny and his group, the Cobra Kai, a challenge is made for the lead character of Daniel LaRusso to enter into a tournament and try to win it all. And if he chickens out, then the Cobra Kai is going to come after him and beat the holy hell out of him. So, of course, as we remember in the film, Daniel is under no. Daniel essentially has to accept the challenge or else, and expects for Miyagi to now teach him the ways of karate after he saves his life from a beating at his high school dance. And Miyagi uses his very unconventional methods of waxing on and waxing off his cars, painting his fence, sanding the floors, and of course Daniel doesn't know what the hell he's doing, how the hell it's teaching him karate. But then soon enough, Miyagi shows him that every little thing that he's teaching him is actually different kinds of move sets that are going to help him in the long run. And the movie elevates itself into something more than just a film of a kid fighting a bully. It's about a kid trying to find his self-esteem, a kid who's trying to find balance in his life. And even during the course of the story, as he begins to learn more about Miyagi's backstory, there's a interesting little development as far as Daniel finding the father that kind of wasn't in his life, and for Miyagi to find the son that he never had. And therefore, you had a film that translated all across the country and around the world and wound up being one of the biggest surprise hits for Columbia Pictures in 1984, spawning a series of sequels, a action figure line, as we're going to discuss momentarily, an animated series, even a remake, and now the recent release of the new television series Cobra Kai, which is on YouTube. And as its second season is rolling along, I figured this would be a great time to look back at this particular toy line that was spawned from the success of these films. So The Karate Kid, like I said, was not expected to be this major smash. But in that sense, it was out in the summer of '84. It was one of the biggest hits. Right away, Columbia Pictures had to greenlight a sequel, and therefore that's when we got The Karate Kid Part 2 in 1986. And in the process of getting ready to gear up for this movie and knowing it was going to be Columbia's big tentpole for the summer, they went all out on the marketing. So this was at the time when they went all out on the soundtrack, which featured Peter Cetera's Glory of Love, which was nominated for an Oscar for Best Song. It was also, at the time, we got a series of Karate Kid video games, most infamously the LJN produced Karate Kid game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. One that was very frustrating to play as a kid, especially when you have to get past the hurricane board in the third level. So that was certainly one that was quite a challenge every time that I rented it as a kid. But then there was this toy line, which was produced by a company called Remco. As I remember as a kid, I was like everybody else. I was a small child when these figures came out, and I wasn't a Karate Kid fan. Not until the third movie came out, and we'll get into a little bit of that. So my neighbors had a son, and let me tell you, my neighbor's kid, who was a childhood friend of mine, he collected almost everything that I wound up getting into in life. He was into Star Wars, he was into wrestling, he was into the Rambo figures, countless others. Like, I mean, if you think like my room is a toy store or Charlie Cannon's room is a toy store, this kid had everything that an 80s kid would enjoy and love and appreciate, and what anybody now who's a vintage collector would just fall hand over foot for. So he had the Karate Kid action figures, and I remember playing with them at his house every now and then before he moved away. But when he moved away, he sold a lot of his figures, and those were the ones I never was able to get. Not until a couple of years later, when I was at a flea market in New Jersey, and somebody was selling a whole bundle of the figures for pretty cheap. I mean, like around 35, $40 loose. And, for a brief time, they were fun to play with. And they had very good likeness to the characters in the films. They all had their karate maneuvers and so on. What I also didn't know in the midst of this bundle was there were also a bunch of like ninja action figures that were also produced by Remco. So just to briefly tackle that, back in '84, there was the whole craze of ninja movies and just the whole martial arts craze that was coming back at that time because of movies like The Karate Kid, The Last Dragon, Cannon's Revenge of the Ninja franchise, American Ninja, even the rise of Chuck Norris, among countless others. So they produced a series of toys called Secret of the Ninja, and this was supposed to be, I guess, their competition to Mattel's He-Man, because this was like a whole set of very muscular looking ninjas and bad guys, all with like their karate chops and their karate kick maneuvers. There were also a bunch of video cassettes that came with some of the toys. I think they were planning to do this as an animated series or a live action series, which never really materialized. So no surprise, it probably wasn't a big seller, even though there were many of these figures produced. So when Remco obtained the license for the Karate Kid in 1986, they decided to take many of those molds and essentially repaint them, recycle them, and swap the heads to have the heads of the very actors in the film, including Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita and Marty Kove and William Zabka, as well as the actors that would be featured in The Karate Kid Part 2. So let's begin with the figure assortment that came out. So again, 1986, Karate Kid Part 2 came out. This was the one that this line would be focused on. It would be focused on figures based on Karate Kid Part 1 and Karate Kid Part 2. For each character, there were a number of assortment figures, as far as there would be one character and they would get maybe no more than three different action figures with different accessories. So, for example, Daniel LaRusso, he had three different figures, all of which were able to do a karate chop, and I believe that they were also able to do a karate kick. Actually, as I'm looking at it now, they were all karate chop maneuvers that he was able to do. So there was one with a breakaway board, one with the breakaway ice from Karate Kid Part 2, and one where it came with breakaway wood, plastic wood, of course. And with each figure, they were all pretty much the same mold of Daniel in the white gi and the black belt as he was dressed in the original. One figure is pretty much just, it's all hard plastic. But the other two figures actually have robes, and this will be a thing with all the other action figures in the line. Each one would contain a robe that you could actually take off and put back on to each figure. And the one with the breakaway ice has his robe that he wore at the end of Karate Kid Part 2. And most famously, that robe would be used again for his animated counterpart in the Karate Kid animated series. And the third one was the same robe, but in white and black instead of red and black. And then we had the Miyagi figures, and there were only about two of them. Actually, no, there were three, as I see. And the three figures, he didn't have like his trademark khaki shirt and pants. Miyagi was always kind of like a casual dresser, or he would look like a handyman. So in terms of likeness in the face, it dead on looked like Pat Morita, and this was obviously his most famous role outside of playing the Mr. T character in Happy Days. No relation to Mr. T, A-Team, and Clubber Lang. But I always found it funny how the Miyagi figure would look so muscular, even though Pat Morita, real life, was like this, skinny little guy. And, they always make him look like a badass in the movies because you could never touch him. You could never, beat the crap out of him because he was just that much smarter and that much more skilled than everybody else. So, no doubt, I mean, to have the figure was always fun. Just to have the dynamic between the two guys. And just like with Daniel, he also had his own accessories. He could break a lug, he could break wood, and he could also break a wooden pole. Um, and actually, looking at it now, he had a number of maneuvers, and I think that was also the case with a number of the figures. They could all do chops, they could all do kicks. Like when you wind up the leg back or you wind up the arm, it could do like a karate maneuver. So probably not much to say about that stuff. And then later we also had the Cobra Kai guys. So we had a Johnny action figure in three different variants. One that contained his classic Cobra Kai gi from the original Karate Kid, and dead on looks like William Zabka, and he also was able to break a wall. He could break a bamboo fence. The variant of that figure was a little bit weird because they decided to give him a blue and yellow gi instead of the black, and kind of awkward considering Cobra Kai is all black and yellow. But I guess they wanted to sell as many figures as they could. The Kreese figure was also pretty much the same way. There were actually two John Kreese toys with Marty Coe's likeness. One that has him breaking a wall, the other breaking a chair, and one of the figures is dead on his gi from the original film, and then there's another where it's him in a purple and silver gi. Go figure. I guess, again, the more figures they could sell, the better. But it wasn't like they had like 8 million characters that they could build off of in these films. That was as far as the first movie action figures go. They did not do any of the side characters. There was no Elizabeth Shue, her Allie character. They didn't do any of Johnny's buddies from the original. Just the characters that, I mean, it would have been cool to have the other Cobra Kai members just for Miyagi and Daniel to fight with. But as a kid, if I was playing with those Karate Kid toys, the Secret of the Ninja figures that I did have, I would actually have like little battles among those. Just because I was thinking in terms of the animated series, even though I didn't watch it for very long, but the cartoon played out more like an adventure story than, a kid fighting bullies for a karate tournament. So, you have to kind of play with your imagination given the limitations of what those films were about. So then we had the figures from Karate Kid Part 2, and there were only two of them that were produced. We had Chozen, the villain from the movie. So just to kind of reiterate in terms of what happens in Karate Kid Part 2, we have the story of Miyagi now playing out. We get to find out a little bit more about his history as he receives a letter about his father being in poor health, and he decides to go back to Okinawa to be at his father's side. Daniel decides to forego college and decides to spend his summer vacation going with Miyagi to Okinawa. And in the midst of trying to get to Miyagi's father, they confront his old friend Sato, who also was trained by Miyagi's father. So they have the same exact skills, they're identical in style. But Sato became this rich man who had this long-standing grudge with Miyagi because they were both in love with the same woman, and the woman was arranged to be married to Sato, but fell in love with Miyagi, and then Miyagi got shipped off to fight in World War II. So Sato got pissed off and wanted to have his battle to the death with Miyagi. And his nephew Chozen has been grown up and raised to hate Miyagi and anybody associated with him. So the whole film is basically a revenge story, then turns into a forgiveness story, but then Chozen is the one that's still not forgiving of the situation. So he's basically the main bad guy as the stakes are raised in part two. It's not about a tournament anymore. It's like a fight for life, essentially. So the Chosen character, he had two different figures. One was him in a yellow and black gi, very much like the one at the end of part two. So it almost was like a weird kind of hybrid. Like he could have been part of the Cobra Kai because it was like the same kind of yellow type of gi that the Cobra Kai would wear, but if it was reversed, it's more yellow than black. And there was a second figure of Chozen in white and purple. Both figures had breakaway boards as accessories that you could play with and break apart. And I think I would say that the alternate figure of Chozen may have been the one that you may have saw in one scene where it looks like he was like training some students briefly when Daniel and the girl in the film are going down the streets of Okinawa in one scene. And then Sato, again, just like with Pat Morita's Miyagi figure, the Sato figure facially looks exactly like the actor from the movie, but at the same time, they make him like this muscular, built guy. And if you've seen the movie, he's kind of on the chunky side, so it's a little weird. But again, they had two figures of him, one in a black and white gi. That was in Karate Kid Part 2. Then the alternate figure was him in a red gi and a black. Both figures, one had a breakaway chain, the other had fighting poles. And there was also a set, what they call a six piece action set. So it came with a Daniel and a Miyagi figure as a 2-pack, but they would also have, I think, 6 different accessories. So if you didn't want to buy the one lone figure, you could get the 2-pack with all the other accessories of the breakaway boards, breakaway ice, breakaway chair. It kind of has the look of the tag team sets that you would buy for the LJN, WWE, WWF action figures back in those days. So I think if you could get that in the box, by the way, many of these figures, if you get them in the box, are probably going to be upwards to $200 to $400 a piece. If you get them loose, I'm pretty sure you could get them under $50. There'll be a lot more if they have the gis and the accessories attached, and that's kind of a rarity as far as I could see. We also had some play sets with this particular line. So we had the competition center. So if you remember in the Karate Kid Part 1 and later Part 3, the climax would be Daniel fighting in the karate tournament in Racina. So this was a play set of that ending. It has like a fake background. It has the exact same floor mat from the film. It comes with a referee. The referee has a slight resemblance to the ref in the Karate Kid films. By the way, played by Pat Johnson, famous martial artist and martial arts coordinator. He was a friend of Bruce Lee's. He also not only did the fight coordination for the Karate Kid films, He also did the fight choreography for Mortal Kombat and its sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. I didn't have any of the playsets, by the way, but certainly if you were able to find it, it was a cool little thing to have. And I think it also had some stickers to it. So it definitely was like you could reenact the ending of the original Karate Kid right then and there. In addition to that, we also had two other playsets that were produced, both based on Karate Kid Part 2. We had the Attack Alley and Training Center, which kind of looks like one of those Sesame Street playsets from the outset. I have a feeling this may have been made for the Secret of the Ninja line because the photograph that I see right now, it has those figures in the display picture. So it's hard to really say if it was made for that purpose or not. But nonetheless, it was a way to have something outside of the competition center to have your Karate Kid characters fighting each other with breakaway doors and, fight them on rooftops, do all kinds of wild stuff, go to town with it. And this was kind of like a cool little setup here. Yeah, so as I'm seeing it right now, it had breakaway doors, a kickaway post, a secret trap door, a breakaway balcony, sliding doors, and you could even set up action figures to pop out and surprise your figures if you want to have them fight. There's also breakaway windows in here as well, a ladder, a hook. I mean, this was maybe for Karate Kid the equivalent of the Ghostbusters Firehouse. And pretty ironic given the fact that Ghostbusters and Karate Kid were Columbia Pictures' top franchises of the 1980s. So pretty cool setup, and probably rare, probably a couple $100 to find if you could get it in a box. So quite an interesting and unique kind of playset to have for the Karate Kid. And there was one more that was also produced, and that was Sato's Cannery. Okay, so if you remember in the Karate Kid Part 2, there was the scene with Daniel trying to avoid that swinging hammer hook as part of a training exercise. So this is a recreation of that very scene. The hook has an auto release device, so just like in the film, you can have it come out. You can have your Daniel or any other characters try to avoid hitting it or trying to do that duck punch or whatever they call it, the drum punch that's like his big maneuver in part 2. Comes with a complete warp and dock. It also has a rope sliding device, so it has like a grappling hook kind of thing. You have your figures kind of slide off with that. A bunch of breakaway boards, a rebounding action figure. So again, another one of these cardboard ninjas that you can have your guys fight. Very weird, but nonetheless, this was pretty damn accurate as far as what the film had and recreating that experience from the film. And apparently there were also two other play sets, which, as far as I know, I don't know if they were ever released. There was the Breakaway Challenge, so that was like a little more of the accessories of breakaway boards, breakaway ice, and there was the Corner Challenge, which looks like you would have a little piece of a corner made, and it would have same thing, breakaway walls, breakaway windows, and these were probably more mini play sets that, as far as I could tell, I don't think they were released. There are pictures of them online, but they're probably the only ones that in the Karate Kid toy line that were not seen to the light of day. So in a nutshell, that was the Karate Kid action figure line from Remco. There was only just this one whole set, as I talked about, that came out in 1986, and no further action figures were produced. Honestly, it's not quite surprising because of the fact that there were just, outside of the characters that I mentioned, there really weren't too many others that were worthy of action figures. You had the love interests of the movies, you had some side characters here and there, but nobody that would actually make for a great action figure and sell. And there were no vehicles either, so we never got that classic tan looking car that Miyagi gave Daniel as a birthday present. that would have been a cool toy to have, just in terms of, having a vehicle, period. And as I know, Ralph Macchio actually owns that car. It was loaned to him as a gift after he did the third film, which I'll get into in a second. But that was it for Karate Kid. There just wasn't a lot. I don't know if they were big sellers at the time. Even though the films were popular, they probably weren't like big enough that they could just keep pumping out more toys. And if they did, it probably would have went the way of something like Jurassic Park, where they would have to just make up characters on the fly and expect for the audience and the fans to buy them. And that was basically it for that. We got the third movie in 1989, and there were no toy licenses for that, despite that film being overly hyped and prepared for the summer of '89. And no surprise, it didn't do as well as the previous entries because the fatigue had set in. The cartoon also was released, and again, the cartoon only lasted one season. It didn't catch on in the way that the Ghostbusters cartoon had caught on. And going back to the third film, now there could have been toys of characters like Terry Silver and Mike Barnes, basically the extension of the Cobra Kai, since the plot of that film dealt with Kreese wanting to get revenge against Daniel Miyagi. But sadly enough, we didn't get those guys. So if Remco had still been making those figures, they probably would have done them. And maybe even recreated the competition center as a re-release. So that was it, and Ralph Macchio was getting older, the franchise was kind of played out, and the audience was moving on to other things. When they did the Karate Kid, the fourth film, the next Karate Kid, where it was now a girl and played by a then unknown Hilary Swank, it was trying to recapture lightning in a bottle. And even though her career went on to have great accolades with Boys Don't Cry and Million Dollar Baby, that film was kind of a false start for her career in that it just didn't translate to box office and didn't connect to the audience in the same way as the original. And not to say that it was Hilary Swank's fault or the studio's fault. I think the tone was totally off because they made it maybe too comedic and a little too silly, even for a typical Karate Kid movie, which is so grounded and so intimate. The action always takes a back seat to the story for each movie. That's why sometimes people complain like the karate isn't all that great. But that's on purpose because it's never supposed to be about the guys fighting each other. It's really about the bond between Daniel and Miyagi. And I think that was kind of getting lost in that film. And then it seemed like the Karate Kid franchise was done for the longest time, up until 2010 with the 2010 remake with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan. And surprisingly enough, in spite of mixed reviews, the movie was financially successful at the box office. But over time, it didn't really have the same kind of impact that the original Karate Kid did. No surprise there. And I think that it just simply came down to Jaden Smith was just making a lot of weird choices with his career. And Jackie Chan is Jackie Chan. I mean, he's no Pat Morita, I'm sorry to say. I do think he's one of the greatest of all time. He's not Pat Morita. So, that didn't really spawn much of anything. And I can't imagine any kid in America who would want a figure of Jaden Smith in their room to play with. It's just simple as that. I mean, there probably weren't a lot of kids who wanted to play with a Ralph Macchio toy, but that was a different time, and the Karate Kid was very popular back then. Not as much now. So, over time, just like as I mentioned with RoboCop the other day, Karate Kid, the original '84 film, just started to really get this resurgence of popularity around 2014, which marked the 30th anniversary of the original film's release. As a result of that new popularity, Funko's Reaction series decided they were going to make a 3/4 inch toy line based on the original film. And not that I collected these, but I gotta say, these were far more dedicated to the original film in terms of the likenesses and the feel of having those Star Wars sized toys in the palm of your hand from that particular decade, and produced from that decade. So in that line, we got two different Daniels, one in the Karate Gi, as we recall, and also came with the trophy that he wins at the end of the tournament. And there was a second figure in his baseball T-shirt and khaki pants, and he comes with the paint and the paint bucket. Uh, Essentially, this was supposed to be the paint the fence scene, so this is what that figure is paying homage to. There was a Kreese figure, there was a Johnny Lawrence figure in the Cobra Kai gi. The Mr. Miyagi action figure, dead on, is the Miyagi that we should have gotten back in 1986. This is the Miyagi down to the nines, the khaki shirt, the khaki pants, and he comes with the toy bonsai tree. So absolutely, this was a perfect setup for Mr. Miyagi and a hell of a tribute to the late great Pat Morita. And for the first time in the entire Karate Kid toy franchise, we got an alley figure. So we finally got an Elizabeth Shue action figure with a boombox of all things. And I guess that's a boombox in the beach scene. Either way, it's the alley in the outfit that she wears at the end of the film, in the sweater and the pink skirt. And as far as I could tell, it's the only action figure in existence of the very lovely Elizabeth Shue, who I actually once saw in LAX airport coming back from California, and sadly I did not get to meet her. But it was still a cool experience nonetheless. And we haven't really talked much about Funko Pops in this whole podcast, but there were also Funko Pop toys. So there were some Funkos of Daniel, of Miyagi, and Johnny. I think that's all you really need to have. Just those three guys. Maybe a Kreese figure would have been cool, but hey, we got the Funko Pop toys. And the Daniel one actually, weirdly enough, kind of reminds me of that Lipton iced tea commercial they did back in the 90s. When they did like the claymation reenactments of classic movies. So they did one for Rocky, and there was one for Karate Kid, and they did like a claymation thing of Daniel and Miyagi, and that's what that kind of reminds me of right then and there. We get Cobra Kai, which came out last year on YouTube Red, and now it's just going to be like their premium outlet. I think they're actually giving it away for free, as I understand. But just a quick plug, it's coming out April 24th or 26th. Either way, it's coming out this month. So, Karate Kid, this Cobra Kai series, when I first heard about it, it kind of reminded me of an idea that I had when the Rocky movie Creed came out. I said, well, what would happen if you had maybe Johnny Lawrence's son go seek out Daniel for his help, and Daniel has to teach him everything that Miyagi taught him. And that would be a perfect way to save the Karate Kid franchise, push it forward, make a real sequel to the original films, not a sequel to the Jaden Smith remake. And when Cobra Kai was announced, it was kind of funny where the guys behind it were the guys that did the Hot Tub Time Machine movies. So right then and there, I thought, oh no, this is going to be a stupid comedy. But the thing was, Ralph Macchio and William Zabka had signed on to do this thing. And over the years, those guys, they've done a number of reunions at Comic Cons. William Zabka directed a music video for the group No More Kings, a video called Sweep the Leg. So he reunited with his Cobra Kai cast, as well as Ralph Macchio. And so there were always like little things where they were kind of like getting back into it, and a lot of fan theories online about how Johnny was the real hero of the Karate Kid and Daniel was the bad guy. So this series was designed to kind of play into that theory, to show that there was a little bit more to Johnny Lawrence than what the film had presented, that he wasn't just a bully, but he had like a legitimate sympathetic backstory. And here's Daniel, who's now like the successful car dealership guy, and the rivalry starts up again. So it was a little weird. I thought this was going to be a dumb comedy when I saw the trailer, and not knowing what to expect, but I was curious. And then I watched the show, and it took me a couple of episodes in before I started to realize how serious they were taking this. Yes, it's got crude humor. Yes, it's kind of silly at points, but you're really getting a fuller picture of the Johnny character, And you're also really beginning to see how Daniel is having those difficulties as an adult without Miyagi around to still be a family man and still abide to the wisdom that Miyagi had taught him. And there's that one beautiful scene in the series, which I think really shows how powerful this was, where Daniel goes to Miyagi's grave, and I thought that was certainly not only a tearjerker, but a true tribute to Pat Morita, and that his influence is not lost on this series at all. And the best part about it is the storyline in itself, as edgy as it gets at times. There's a nice kind of twists and turns and sort of like a very Shakespearean way about the the, the daughter of Daniel and the son, the biological son of Johnny. Then you have this kid Miguel who starts out like you think he's going to be like Daniel, but then through the Cobra Kai training, he becomes more like Johnny in the original. A lot of different complex layers in there, and something that's very timely because it's showing that maybe the Cobra Kai way isn't all that bad, especially now when millennials are so overly sensitive. That here's a way of martial arts to say screw that. If you're gonna strike first. You be the badass. And Daniel's still trying to go by a more peaceful way of teaching karate, and that's what we're going to see more of in the second season. And the best thing about it is those showrunners are leaving all options on the table. So as if you saw the first season, they do make reference to the characters in the third film, Mike Barnes and Terry Silver, and it's very likely they may pop up at some point. We may even see Johnny's buddies from the original Cobra Kai come about. So everything is on the table. Elizabeth Shue might even come back for all we know. And many of the actors from the past films have all said they'd like to come if they're called up. So time will tell. I'm pretty excited about it. And the success of Cobra Kai has led to even more Karate Kid merchandise. And most particularly the company NECA, most famous for many action figure lines from the current RoboCop, Terminator, Aliens, Predator, you name it. They have a set of 8-inch Karate Kid action figures, perfect in likeness to the actors, and all in different sets. So they have a Daniel figure, they have a Johnny figure, both in their respective robes. They have the play set of the competition center, and it's exactly as it is in the movie. It has like a background with the tournament graphic, and the referee in the middle. They're also all posable, and they also come with the competition poster. They come with the trophy from the film, and there's also other new figures that just came out for it, with clothes. Actually, all the clothes you can actually remove, and they're all made of cloth. So there's Daniel in the baseball gi. There's a Johnny in that Halloween skeleton suit and the makeup, and there's a Miyagi figure in his overalls. So these are pretty exciting to see and to have, and really just again a testament to what made the Karate Kid so special. The toys certainly prove that this is something that certainly has lasted the test of time, and Cobra Kai has only created more interest in the Karate Kid franchise. And I would even go as far as to say that in terms of nostalgia, it's proving that yes, you can go back to the originals, you can keep it in continuity, and at the same time introduce it to a new audience for this generation and push it forward. And if it's done right, and if the story is done well, that new generation will follow. So, in a nutshell, those are the Karate Kid action figures. The NECA toys are out right now. The Remco figures, of course, you probably would have to find on eBay. And like I said, you get them loose, you could probably get them relatively cheap. But in the box with the robes and the accessories intact, expect around between $200 and $400 a piece. And those 2 packs and play sets are probably going to be even more than that, if they're fully in mint condition. So that's about it for the Karate Kid. And, as always, I'd like to talk about the figures that we wish could have been made and would have made our childhood special. I mean, again, given what we had with the Remco figures, there's not much. I would just say I would have liked to have seen all of Johnny's buddies in the Cobra Kai as just regular henchmen that you could fight off of. They should have had the car that Daniel owned from the original. Maybe it would have been cool if you had Daniel on the bicycle and the bicycle could bend apart, just like what happens in the first film. And I wish they could have made a line for Karate Kid Part 3, even though it wasn't successful. I would have liked to have seen maybe a playset of the Cobra Kai dojo. I would have liked to see Terry Barnes and Mike Barnes and Terry Silver action figures, and a playset that should have been made and wasn't was in part two, the festival scene at the end when the Okinawa people are having like their dance ritual, they're all celebrating, and then Daniel and Chozen have to fight on the little island. I think that would have been kind of cool to have, and certainly because this was like the last. If you played the video games, that was like the last level of all the Karate Kid games was that scene at the end of part two. That should have also been a place in addition to the ones that they had made. So in a nutshell, that's basically it for the Karate Kid, and this was another fun one, guys. And there may be some other solo ones that I'll do in the near future, but expect more of the, my partnering up with Albert and Mike and Craig and Marcos and Charlie and even Tom Melendez every now and then. But once in a while, like I said, those guys, they don't collect all of these figures. They don't have many memories of them. So I kind of have to fill in the blanks every now and then. So that's it for us. And as always, you can email me for comments and suggestions for future episodes to the Silver Screen AF podcast at gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Silver Screen AF1. And don't forget to like us on YouTube. Not YouTube. Sorry. You can actually subscribe to my AJ Epics Productions YouTube channel, and that's where all these videos will go. And be sure to like us on Facebook. So, as I would say, sweep the leg and have a good day, folks. So.